Romilly Golding woke up to a toxic relationship. She faced it head on and now helps others do the same.
I'm Romilly Golding. I am a relationship recovery coach and author based in the UK.
I would love for you to tell the story of how you sort of woke up to the fact that you were in a toxic relationship, because oftentimes we don't even see the red flags or realize what's happening when we're ensconced.
We kind of often feel that something is off, and these things, like these red flags, are often so subtle that they seem kind of insignificant. And it's really hard to put our finger on them. So I think for me, in the toxic relationship, it was just a growing sense of that things were not okay, just kind of small jarring incidents where I felt I'd been kind of pushed back again. And it just grew over time. I think the boiling frog analogy is really apt here, where, the frog doesn't realize that it's kind of being boiled alive. The water just gradually gets kind of warmer and warmer. So, yeah, I think it was an incremental process and just kind of always feeling that something was off and not being able to put my finger on it really, rather than like massive. It did then turn into kind of big incidents, kind of galvanizing incidents. But up until then, it was actually several years of just feeling something not quite right at the heart. Yeah.
How did you extricate yourself? Because oftentimes that too is a very big step because there's so much fear around it, and then psychological issues on top as well as physical, and
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
emotional.
Yeah, definitely. So I've actually left a couple of really difficult relationships. One was a massive kind of crash and burn and kind of fleeing. And the other was kind of fighting fires. I think anytime you're leaving a toxic relationship, it really does feel as though you are going through hell, actually, especially if you're also trying to keep all your daily items kind of alive around you in terms of, are you managing children? Do you have to still show up and go to work? Do you have to still kind of pay the mortgage? Do you have to, do the MOT on your car and all these kind of things? Like few of us have the luxury of just taking a break or having a breather. So I would say you have like the inner turmoil of leaving a relationship, which can be like a marriage that you've invested in as well. So you kind of have that grief and sadness and burden and sorrow of the end of a relationship. Then you have all the kind of logistical and daily life to still cope with, plus like the emotional trauma as well of recognizing that you've been in something difficult and unpleasant and toxic. So it really is a kind of multifaceted experience, and one that can be really lonely. I think if people haven't got other people around them that have actually left a toxic relationship, it's people really don't understand like the depths of loneliness that you can feel, because you feel so alone and so kind of shocked to your core. It really does go beyond like a mere divorce or something that can, that is never pleasant, but can, sometimes be amicable. You don't quite have the seismic shock as you do when you're leaving a toxic relationship.
How long of a period was it after the marriage disintegrated and you left and had new space before you really felt safe and could look back on your experience with a little separation, almost as observer versus perhaps, some of the victim
Mhm.
mode?
Yeah, really important question. So I would say actually the first time around I didn't. I just walked straight into another relationship. I didn't heal. I was just I found someone else who was really different and I walked straight in. And I'm just sharing that because it's really common.
Hmm.
And people kind of wonder, they then wake up again and then they're like, I've ended up in a really similar situation, right? And I think we're so often like craving for love or kind of wanting to make up like lost time and salve some of these wounds, that it's quite easy to walk into another relationship or to be extra kind of swayed by someone who pays us nice attention and things like that, then once again, we have our guards down and we don't look out for the red flags, right? So just being fully honest, yeah, I walked straight into another one, and then it took me another couple of years to realize that I was in something different, and then different but similar. And then I kind of woke up like halfway through the relationship and realized what I was in. And I would say I used that last year or so as like a case study to like observe what was going on, the patterns in the relationship, also what I was doing and how I was reacting. But then after that, I would say honestly, and it's really hard to hear, these things can take years. They can take years to get out, kind of strategically, they can take a couple of years, maybe logistically, to get things in place, to get pieces in place, especially if people have to extricate and find new financial terms. That can take a while to set in motion. But I would say, yeah, it took a good couple of years from when I was out and deciding to really heal and then getting back to myself and having the space. It took a couple of years, yeah.
When you look back in your ancestral history, have other women in your ancestry experienced things similar and have they behaved in a way that you did? I mean, I certainly can for myself. Both my maternal and paternal grandmothers said they would never marry my grandfathers again had they had a choice to do that. And I too had your trajectory. I mean, for me, I was so fearful of not having approval from the outside and the feeling, the terror of being abandoned, really kept me into cyclical relationship. I always say, I was with a boy since first grade and Billy Fritz, until, my divorce. And then it was a 7 year much needed hiatus. But when you look back in your ancestry, do you see any similarities and perhaps a cycle or two that you may have broken?
It's such a deep question. Yeah, it's only like a few years ago that I realized that I had a connection with my grandmother who had actually lived through something similarly abusive.
Mm.
And I always knew that she'd had a really wonderful story of, so she was actually she was born in the States and then she came over to the UK. And then she had decided to go back to the States and work in every state. So this was maybe kind of in the 50s or something, right? So really bold and exciting. And she wanted to work in every state in the US. Um, so on her own, right? A really bold and adventurous thing to do. Um, so one of the first things is that she kind of abandoned that project and it was thwarted by a man back in the UK. So she came back to England and she didn't fulfill that dream. Secondly, I think then when she was married, she was stuck and it was controlled. She lived with her mother-in-law all her life. So there probably wasn't as much of like a freedom and intimacy as you would want. And then I know that kind of at some point in her life, I think, she hooked up with another guy and then he really was not like a good one and he was abusive. And to the extent that I became like estranged from her, etc., to the extent that which I always find interesting, she went blind pretty soon afterwards because I think she couldn't see, like she literally like couldn't see, wasn't able to see what was going on. And so it was a shame because I'd had a really loving like relationship with her. And she'd always been, because I wasn't that close to my mother, she was always like a big kind of cheerleader, and I could talk to her about kind of girly issues, and she was quite glamorous and things like that. And it was a shame then that we were estranged, and then I didn't, see her at the end of her life and things like that. And then I would say a few years ago, my mother gave me some letters from and I don't think she'd read them. And I think they were letters that she was sending to a friend in the States. She'd had like connections with the States, and she was writing about feeling trapped. And she was feeling trapped and she didn't know what to do and things like this. And I could see the same kind of frenetic wheeling, no like emotionally grounded behavior. So it's a shame, but yeah, in terms of cycles, that's generationally, that's the relationship I know the most and that like resonates with me the most. And I do now still talk to her, even though she's obviously passed on. I hope now she can see what I'm trying to do, right? In terms of, breaking those cycles and being more aware. So, yeah.
And you are breaking them and you are more aware. You've even written a great, fantastic book. Yeah. Is it 21 Red Flags?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So it's called 21 Red Flags, Spotting the Signs of an Unhealthy Relationship. And it is about kind of spotting the subtle signs that, when you're in a relationship. And I really wanted to pick out the ones that seem, that can so easily go under the radar and that we so easily kind of brush under, because I think they really need validating. And they are the ones that make the women stay because they're not so obvious, because they're not so evident, because, we're not being like physically assaulted, but it is like a perpetual kind of micro assaults, right? Of things like kind of eye rolling and sabotaging our sleep, just really small things that we really can't kind of put our finger on that just seem so insignificant in isolation. But when they are all present and when they are a repeated pattern, that's when they become abusive.
Yeah. And when you wake up to that covert abuse, it's absolutely bone rattling, horrifically horrible if you're still in the relationship. And for me, I felt like it was important to put those pieces together to really see. And I had the privilege of living with my ex-husband to be. And I say privilege because there was no way that I could now just push that behavior aside and make excuses for it when it was so blatantly revealed when we were in the same home, going through a divorce process, which I wouldn't wish on anyone. So now you're helping others with similar issues. What surprises you in that work?
Yeah, I think one of the most surprising things is, I mean, on the outside, it's not surprising, but you can see, once you're on the other side, you can see how much kind of fear people have and how much stuckness people have
Mm.
and how much people spend kind of in the ruminating middle and how much they need help being pulled. It's like they're in kind of quicksand or something, how much they really need help being pulled through to the other side and need stories of kind of validation and that they can do it. I think also what is surprising is the number of it is, yeah, it is and it isn't surprising, but the number of women who are really accomplished, professionally accomplished, in the home, kind of confident, etc., that are just kind of become an empty shell and find it so hard to just cling on to any kind of vestiges of who they were before. And they really need so much help in being able to see through to the other side.
What was that breaking point for you? If you could put it into words, what was that line in the sand where you said, "Okay, that's enough. I don't care what it takes. I'm gonna leave this scenario."
Yeah. There are a couple of phrases that were said to me that are kind of branded on my soul. Yeah. And one of them was, I'm just going to repeat them here because when you're in these relationships, what kind of can really strike you is that just these moments of breathtaking, like cruelty from someone that is supposed to love you, etc. And so I was, running a business and raising three children and, running a household, etc. And my ex-husband said to me, for a woman, you don't do much anyway. And it was just such a crystalline moment. That was the red line. Yeah. That was the red line that I couldn't get over. And it was just kind of everything melted in that one moment. But I still couldn't process it. I still couldn't process like like, kind of like the casual cruelty, but also now I see when we look at kind of John Gottman and the work of the Gottman Institute, they talk about the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. And I love their work because they sum it up so well. So the four horsemen are, so these are the ones that like kind of there's no return if these are present in your relationship. And so it's stonewalling, criticism, defensiveness, and contempt. And so that phrase was so full of it's kind of full of contempt. Even if it was throwaway, even if after the event it was joked off, it was brushed off, it was
Hmm.
excused off. And it was a long time ago. It was probably 10 years ago now. I that the phrase is still kind of brandished. Yeah. Yeah. And then yeah, the other one was a bit more kind of cinematic and someone started throwing my belongings out of a kind of fourth floor balcony window, throwing my belongings at me onto the street and like calling me names. And then I was like, okay, right, this is really is I am really done. But I just would want to say that. So I got home after that and I picked up my belongings and I got home and I was aware that I was feeling anger in the moment and I was feeling that I was done in the moment. But I was also aware, and I'm just going to be really honest, that sometimes I'd also had similar kind of red lines that had maybe turned out to be like a pink line because I'd gone back.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
because, and there was even times when I would try, with a girlfriend, I would explain what's going on, and she'd be like, right, this time that's it, like kind of no going back, promise you won't text him, promise. And I would be like, I promise, and I kind of block, etc. And then I didn't. And then I would
Mm.
unblock, and then I would re-text and re-engage just to kind of like again, like solve that wound, just to try and get closure, just to try and yeah. So I'm just sharing that because I felt so bad. I felt so bad that I was going back, but just for anyone like listening to kind of not be ashamed if they are kind of in that cycle, right? And it's only when we realize what is happening and we can name it and we know that we're in what's called like a trauma bond that we can fully break it. But yeah, those were two those were two kind of red lines. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I remember hearing very early on the only way to divorce an alleged narcissist, because that was the case that I was in, was holding no contact. And I thought, you got to be kidding. Like, we're in the same household. But I did. I held no contact. I engaged only through writing, only when I had to, and only in a very short sentence. And I held that all the way through um, custody, sharing custody.
Mm.
And otherwise, he would have lured me right back in because the manipulation is so articulate, precise. They know exactly how to dive right in. So, okay, 10 years, you have you have the book and you have a platform where you're helping other people surviving these circumstances and showing them the way, showing them the light. What would you say to that young woman going into these types of relationships now that you're on the other side and on the other side so much that you're helping others? What would you say to that younger Romilly?
I think the main lesson and the main takeaway, one of the main things I didn't do is just take space. I didn't have space. And at the beginning of these relationships, they're really exciting, right?
Mm.
And we are on cloud nine and it feels kind of cinematic, etc. But I think just at all costs, just like build in space, right? Just to slow down that crazy momentum because that space is so crucial for checking in with ourselves and not self-abandoning, not abandoning all other aspects of our lives, but also really crucially, just to go over any funny little thing that was said and just go, hang on a minute, what was that about? Because there's also something I remember at the beginning of like the second relationship where this gentleman was really charming, and one day we were parked at a gas station, and he got out and he filled up my car with gas, which I'd found very gentlemanly. And I said, "Oh, that's really nice. I like it, when you do that." And he said, "If you keep on saying that, it will make me question who you are, and it will make me question the choices you've made." And I
Mm.
was like, whoa, okay. So I kind of see where he was getting from, but it was said in a kind of quite a nasty, kind of shutting down way and a kind of shaming way. There was
Mm.
so many layers in there as well, as in like, who do you think you are? Like a question who you've been before. Just, those nuanced, multifaceted, kind of multi-pronged barbs that these people are so
Mhm.
good at. But that's typically the kind of remark I would have brushed aside rather than going, hang on a minute, that wasn't actually okay. So I think, yeah, I would have told the younger Romilly, just, put the brakes on, yeah, and have some space, don't self-abandon, and have time to kind of reflect because I think it's so important. We can get caught up in these really toxic and difficult relationships, but I also think there are patterns. And I also think that with these toxic people, narcissists, etc., they are so textbook that if we can predict some of the patterns, we can prevent it.
And I think the grace, Romilly, is that you woke up to the system. I mean, I believe I was sort of set up. I was programmed in a certain way. I mean, a lot of the mothers that I raised my son around weren't allowing their daughters to read the princess stories. But, for me, it was be quiet, serve, don't make a fuss. You know, if j- just no feelings, no emotions, keep them under the cuff. And you woke up and out of that and said no more by giving yourself space, which is such a luxury that we do not allow, but it's almost like it's programmed from the mind. It's not until I found my heart that I could actually respect myself enough to give myself the honor of that space. And I'm so grateful that you brought that up today. It's been a lovely conversation with you, and it's just nice to see your glow. And I'm sure people are going to want to know more about you, about your book, and about your offerings. So where do we send them?
Yeah, thank you so much. So my website is romillygolding.com. So that's ROMILLY and then Golding, just like gold, with ING at the end. I have done a special offer if people want to explore coaching with me. So they can go to Romilly Golding /offer. I always do like a clarity call, so people can book a free clarity call. We can see if we can connect, etc. But on my website is all information about my coaching, about my qualifications. I'm an ICF accredited coach. I'm a trauma-informed coach, and then they can also find my book, which is coming out in October 2025, and it will be available on Amazon and other outlets.
Well, I'm so grateful for your sharing your experience so openly with us today, and best of luck in all endeavors, Romilly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. It's really lovely to speak with you.